Do you kind of weave some outdoor education things, outdoor components into your Sanghas practice as you lead it?
Definitely. I think, there are certain meditations or visualizations where we'll often bring in nature components, the elements into what we're contemplating. We also, I don't know how much you know about Tendai practices, the Kaihogyo mountain pilgrimage is a tradition within Tendai, and we have sort of the light version, the really light version of that for lay practitioners, where we'll do it's kind of a devotional walking pilgrimage practice through a local park or wooded area. So we do some of that for sure.
And is that the forest park? Do I have that right? Is that what's nearby? Is that where you go to?
Forest Park is nearby, and there's also Mass Audubon property, Laughing Brook, that we've done pilgrimage there as well.
Oh, it's like
Which
it's mhm.
I was just gonna say, it's not like an official Mass Audubon program, so I probably
Oh,
should.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, but I didn't realize that. So there's a Massachusetts, like, is it a birding society kind of thing? Is that like what that is, or is it
Oh,
some
yeah,
different?
it's within Massachusetts, I think there's a few different nonprofit um organizations that work to preserve public lands. So there's several of them in Massachusetts. In addition to like state parks, there are also these sort of regional land protection organizations, and that just happens to be one of them. And they have some nice trails there. And a nice loop for the energy that you experience.
Yeah, yeah. So, what do you like? What's the beginning stage of kind of preparing a sangha for a an outdoor pilgrimage walk, like in that Mass Audubon space, or even in Forest Park?
Yeah, we start by, I try to set the tone in advance so people know a little bit what to expect and how to dress, how to um, show up, what to expect when they get there. There's an element of really making a clear distinction between hiking, which I think many people who are attracted to this type of practice might be attracted to going for a hike in the woods. And so there's an element of kind of naming, this isn't a hike, it's a practice. And of course there's overlap there, but there's sort of a different function and purpose with this. And then for me, there's I think a really important element is boundary crossing into the practice when you start. So there's kind of a threshold we cross over into the space, um, being aware of leaving behind like our ordinary world chit chat, stepping into now we're doing the practice. That particular space is nice because there's sort of an archway of trees you can go under, and then really early on you cross a bridge with a stream, which is a lovely place to recite the Heart Sutra as you're going past. So I think there's this element of the transition into the practice. Once we cross through, we'll do some devotional practices to start out and then move along. And similarly, on the way out, there's another threshold crossing.
That's a really wonderful element that you just shared about how there's that you have to kind of cross it again on the way back. Like you to make sure that that space remains a ritual space or something like that. At least for that period, you have to close it. Like you open it and you have to close it. Whereas I feel like sometimes um in my mind it's more like the harder part is you know walking into it and leaving things behind, but then I want to take it with me. I want to take that kind of sanctity, if you will, like with me out of that space and into my life. And it doesn't necessarily have to be a hard stop, like, no, now you cannot be present. Now you can no longer be this. But you have to like let that space exist exactly where it is to a degree. And I think that that's a really special thing. And then also kind of distinguishing between it being something different than a hike, even though you are kind of trailing, operating on a trail. And as far as the attire, is it kind of movement based attire, or are people encouraged to wear more Tendai related clothing?
I we t- I encourage people to wear subdued colored clothing that's appropriate for the weather, for being outdoors. And if it were a group of priests on a walk together, maybe we would be in more formal attire. I'll tend to wear white. But I think there's this balance we're trying to strike in a public space. And it's something I often wrestle with. I can certainly easily put on the formal the full garb, the full regalia. And how do we integrate ourselves with the surrounding we're going out into? And so this is a public space where we may see other people out for a walk, and it could certainly evoke their curiosity if they see us dressed that way. But if our purpose is really to go and practice, we want to kind of stay in that practice mindset. And so maybe we don't want to encourage people to interact with us so much. We want to stay sort of focused.
Yeah, you don't
And I
have
think
to.
it can make some people uncomfortable too. Sorry. And so we're really trying to think about impact there.
People uncomfortable that are passersby or like within the group.
Passersby. Yeah.
Passersby, yeah,
Just
yeah.
I think it could be unexpected and just yeah.
A lot to just kind of put together, or like try to wrestle with, I guess, as they go about their
Mhm.
time. Yeah, I get that. And then when it comes to the approach of the walking, so you had mentioned that you do there's an opportunity to do a Heart Sutra chant along that bridge that crosses that stream. Uh, are there what is the I guess prompt or the encouraged mindset to be in? Where is it kind of be open to the sounds of a bird, to the babbling of the creek, or is it pay attention to breath or pay attention to whatever comes up, or is it more like of a you sutra based chanting, putting more ritual elements or texts into implemented into the pilgrimage walk?
Hmm. Yeah, that's a really good question. I think there's a blend of all of those things in a way. And I mean, on one hand, when we recite the Heart Sutra, we just recite the Heart Sutra, right? We're doing that practice. There are points of time along the way where people are just engaged in, if we think about the shamatha, vipassana, shikan aspect of the practice, the calming the mind, calming and looking is how we often translate it here. And so the calming part, we're just trying to sort of watch the thoughts as they arise and let them go. And so doing that with movement, rather than focusing on the breath, maybe we're using our body or our feet touching the ground as we move as that vehicle to bring that sense of stopping or calm. And then the looking, there at different points along the way will be different. There may be some contemplations that I invite people into that are connected to where we are in the path, sort of the energy that's there based on where it is on the trail, might be evocative of a particular Buddha or bodhisattva or something like that.
Oh, wow. So, and uh may I just have an example of like one area or like part of the trail that I guess maybe has like some meaning for you in particular, like where I don't know if you feel gravitated towards in that space a particular bodhisattva or a Buddha, but I was just kind of curious if like what that space looks like.
Yeah, and it's really interesting, right? Uh, so I think going back a step, the sort of through our training at Tendai Buddhist Institute, we initially learned this pilgrimage practice, and part of it was sort of trying to pause in different places and experience different energies that were there. And so that's what I've tried to that sort of has infused how I'm doing things here. But I started this practice like years and years ago at this particular spot, and then recently came back to it about a year ago and hadn't done it for several years. So I was wondering what would come up in following that trail again. And it was interesting to note that a lot of there were a few things that had a different feeling to me this time. And so many of them, I was like, oh, this still feels like Jizo Bodhisattva, for example. And so I can't always articulate what specifically I'm looking at that brings up that quality, but that's sort of the sense that I get from it. And I'm not sure if every Tendai priest would feel the same thing, but certainly as when we practice together, there are elements where we sort of pause, and most people sort of are like, oh yes, this feels like this would be a good place to do a veneration for Avalokiteshvara, for example.
Wow. I really appreciate how there is this uh, flexibility, I guess, or looking again kind of element where you can have in your mind established areas that more or less kind of give you those energies. And then when you've haven't been there for a while, you can return, and then you give yourself an opportunity to reassess and like say, because things have grown or broken or been moved or added or whatever it is, and that shifts inherently the energy of it, and so it creates maybe some opportunities for something new to engage with. Maybe it becomes something that you walk right by and just don't feel connected to in any particular way. But also too, I like this idea that, if you're surrounded with other Sangha members or leaders, Sangha leaders, and there can be this kind of a general agreement as to what's being perceived or what's being felt, and have that become a new station, as it were, for like another veneration. And as a part of your training, I mean, have you been to Mount Hiei, or have you done any of those kind of like pilgrimage sites and done some of these extended walks?
Hiei only as a tourist, and the walks we've done. So at the Tendai Buddhist Institute in New York State, which is where the U.S. folks mostly train, we do a version of the pilgrimage there, and it's in rural New York. So you're on roads and dirt roads, but it's nature-y, and quite a good distance. We spend it it's nearly a full day of walking.
Wow, wow. Yeah, what, because I know that you're involved in you're an assembly director for the Tendai Buddhist Institute, and so I know that there's some correspondence or some engagement that you have with the institute currently. And when it comes to your training, like what was that experience like? Going to that spot in New York and kind of the beginnings of your ordination.
That was actually my home temple, and so my I sort of discovered Buddhism and discovered Tendai around the same time. I mean, I had read, I think my first entry point was reading Thich Nhat Hanh, and that really sort of, got me interested in Buddhism, and then various life events kind of led to this sense of dukkha, and okay, now I need to find something to address dukkha. And so really I lived in the Berkshires at the time, and there were flyers up in the store. I thought, oh, look, a meditation group, I'll go try that. And it was sort of one thing led to another, and I ended up practicing at Tendai Buddhist Institute, um, and then sort of just kind of moved on to the training path there, which is, I think that was early in its development as a training institute too. So now we have people coming from like all over to train, but back then it was more local folks.
Wow. So you've kind of watched this institute, not necessarily from the ground up, but you've seen it kind of grow and expand and kind of call and reach a lot of people from all over the United States, or is it even more global than that?
There are people from Europe who have trained there as well, but it's officially the North American ordination platform for Tendai.
Wow. Wow. Uh, and so at one point, it's fascinating too, because you came across this flyer for a meditation group, and then did it. And I know that Tendai has a lot of ritual elements, and and I know that you were kind of finding Buddhism and Tendai at the same time and all that. Did did any of it kind of take a while for you to feel comfortable with, or did you kind of more immediately feel connected to it and wanted to deepen it?
I think that, well, so there actually were a couple of branch sanghas that were just outside of the Tendai Buddhist Institute. So I technically sat at one of those branch sanghas first, which was half an hour away from there, in a smaller little community group. And actually, so that to get at the like, was it always comfortable? I laugh now about this with the priest who was the leader of that branch sangha. My first day of going to sit there, we're in this like, it's this beautiful building on top of a mountain, where the like big windows, you can see nature all around. And I think I meditated once when I was in high school, but this was, years and years and years later. I didn't really know what I was in for. And so we're sitting there, and I'm just like sitting, eyes wide open, looking across from me. And he like crawls across the room a little bit as the leader, and like to give me some feedback. And he's like, you should have your eyes closed, or, close your eyes a little bit. And I've, all the like perfectionism and whatnot is like, oh, I did it wrong. And, great, right? Great opportunity. But I came back, but now it's really funny. Like I laugh at that. He's like, yeah, I would never get feedback in that way again, right? We both sort of learned from that incident. So that was definitely less comfortable.
Yeah,
Yeah.
that's so funny. What a visual of just someone like kind of crawling over and being like, it's, this is actually, what's going on here. And but it also too, like that, it's great that you have a continued relationship with that person, and then also too that you have a sense of humor about the beginnings of it all. And when did it start to click in a way where you're like, I need to not only be a sangha member here, I need to deepen this to where I would like to have more of a, well, leadership role, but also just like more of an official capacity to my practice?
I think for me, um, it's been there's like a twofold piece. So going into the training, um, was more about people saying, oh, you should do the training. And so I said, okay. And then when I had been ordained for a few years, several years before I actually started a Sangha. And I think at that point, there was a sense of, okay, I've gone through through this training, I should be giving back in some way to others. And so it was time to sort of just step up and start a Sangha. And so it was really more of seeing a need, or maybe feeling a sense of, I've been given this, what am I going to do with it now?
Yeah. And as you developed your sangha, when I was looking at the website for Winding Path Sangha, I know that it wasn't always where you are in Springfield, Massachusetts right now. Like there was a time when you were um, in, I think it was a church and then maybe an office space or something like that. Like it's been through a couple different physical iterations. What was that like? What was that kind of finding a space like?
Yeah, so we started in 2011, and we were initially in a basement room in an Episcopal church. So one of those rooms that they use for like a nursery school. So there was like glitter on the floor at times. I mean, it was pretty amazing. They were so generous with letting us use that space for years, really, and just welcoming us in. Um, and it was like, it had a funky feeling to it, right? It was, and there were times where we were intersecting with the choir practice just down the hall. So, if you're trying to go for, especially people who, if it's their first time meditating, usually having some level of quiet is like conducive to a an easier practice anyway. So that eventually became the reason we left to seek another space, was just and that, and I think the feeling at our main temple, or like any of the temples in Japan, where you have this sense of, you walk into a temple and it feels like, oh, this is a practice space. There's this energy that the space holds from all the practice that's been done there over the years. And I think ours had we pull the altar table out of the closet feel to it. And so it was more work to create that feeling of settledness each week. So we went from there, and had kind of over the years been looking for a permanent place, but hadn't found one yet. And then if one of our Sangha members had a connection who had it was an office space in what was almost like not exactly an auto mall, but there are like muffler shops and auto repair places in this kind of like strip mall area. And we were in the front room. And if you go through the back door, there's like car jacks and stuff like that for doing auto repairs. So we were in this little room. It looked quite lovely, and then you just couldn't go back to where the auto work could happen. And that
Wow.
place, though, we were there for about half a year. The challenge with it was, in New England in the winter, it was just like open the door right into the meditation space. So anyone who came in, all the hot air would escape and you would be cold again. um,
Wow.
so
I
yeah.
I'd imagine that a bigger obstruction to practice might have been just like hearing cars getting jacked up on hydraulic lifts and stuff like that. But it was just the winter. It was like the no front
Well,
door. Yeah.
they weren't actually using the hydraulics while we were in there.
Oh, good.
So
Okay.
yeah, there were like next door, there were rental cars being returned and whatnot, but it was a relatively quiet space. It was actually a little quieter than the church had been.
Oh, wow. That's that's really funny. Yeah, and uh yeah, I totally hear what you're saying too, where, in the model in Japan, after all these, decades, if not centuries of practice that are in one space, and that how it's imbued and how there is history and, maybe just whatever years and years of incense smoke might do to a wall and all that kind of stuff. And what that does to create space. And then you have this feeling where you're, pulling out a foldable chair every time, or a foldable altar all the time, and kind of a regroup, reset, having all these different noise elements going on, glitter, which is the most intense craft material. uh, and yeah, so I can see how there was some movement at the beginning, and then you found yourself eventually in the uh what is it, the Homer B. Hulbert space? How Hulbert?
Yeah, I do not I am not entirely sure of the correct pronunciation of his name. Yeah.
And I had, before I was kind of doing my research for Winding Path Sangha, I did not know anything about this individual, but he's the great great grandson of the founder of Dartmouth, and was a big time uh, Korean what is it, activist. Like he was kind of all about fighting the Japanese occupation, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Really interesting. I mean, I knew nothing about him until we bought this place and we're doing research on, we found the sort of earliest deed we could find in the historical documents, the earliest owner, which had his name. And I was surprised to, I looked him up and said, well, actually, he was not famous necessarily, but there are a few books by him out there, and there's a society sort of celebrating his work. But I find it just really interesting and something fortuitous about this person who was such a fan of, you know, of Korean culture, advocating against Japanese occupation of Korea, and in this space, followed by years later, this like Japanese school of Buddhism. And I've thought a lot about that over the years, and I have nothing really perceptive to articulate about it, but I just think there's something interesting to that, and it feels
Yeah,
fitting in a way, or there's something to work through in that.
yeah, and yeah, there's definitely that the cultural dynamic where it's not necessarily opposing, right? Because it's not necessarily it's just it is hard to kind of articulate, but looking at it from a Buddhist perspective, it feels as though, and I'm reaching here, but this is what I do. I reach, and but there's this thing where let's call him Homer because I don't know how to Hubert.
Yeah,
But
perfect.
yeah, okay. He's a really really big deal about, and it was a big for the Korean activism of his time. I think to the point where there's a statue erected in Seoul of him, which is a rarity for an American or for somebody else to be recognized like that, according to his Wikipedia. And it's all about kind of like liberation and independence. And I feel like bringing a Buddhist uh, Sangha into and housing a Buddhist Sangha in this building has something that's a liberating quality to it. And maybe there's something about it there. I don't know. I don't know what Homer's religious affiliation was, but there is this spirit of independence and spirit of liberation that is kind of being reflected and rippled through.
Yeah. Yeah.
And yeah, it's pretty amazing. And then so how does it feel to have a landing spot, and now you can kind of really decorate and really have something more permanent for your Sangha?
Yeah, it really has been nice to have this. I mean, the space itself, if you've it seems like you've read a lot about us online, and so maybe have seen the photos of the space. There's a lot of wood in just the way it's decorated when we moved in, and so that has a really grounding effect in the Hondo and in the just the space in general. It's nice, I think, because we're able to schedule events outside of one weekly meeting time. That was really one of the restrictions with using borrowed spaces, is anytime you did something outside of that sort of one evening a week, 2 hour slot, you had to arrange separate plans, and weekend activities were usually out because that's when most church spaces are being used. And so we've been able to offer more programs at different times now. We've had people donating. We have a pretty significant library now because people have been donating a lot of books. So that's interesting.
And they have a
And
library, yeah.
I think, yeah, yeah. We actually moved in right. It was not too long before the pandemic. So we had a lovely kind of New Year's practice period where we were just open a lot for like a couple weeks around the New Year's period for people to just come in and sit, and that was wonderful. And then I think it was several months after that where we went into into lockdown, and everything was virtual. So for a while we had this wonderful space and weren't able to use it. And then people really became at home here once we came back in person after the pandemic. And I think it was nice. There were people who had found us online and had never meditated in person. And so then to come and sit with the group in that space felt really good to them.
Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah, and it really is. It's so unfortunate in so many different ways what the pandemic did to just kind of halt and keep things empty and disconnected in a physical way. And yet it's so wonderful to hear that people have more or less felt more comfortable to show up and have looked you up and now come in. Do you find that? I mean, I know that for yourself, you found Tendai and meditation through a pamphlet somewhere. Is that something that you kind of post up in coffee shops nearby in Springfield, or do you kind of more just publish the website and whoever comes and that's the extent of your outreach?
We started off with flyers and pamphlets, and I, I mean, I think the internet was certainly around in 2011, but I just don't think we used it to the same level we now use that as the way to publicize. And in fact, early on when we were back meeting in the church still, like when we were trying to start up the Sangha, there was a month where we had no one show up. And then we got covered by the local newspaper, and that we were existing. And suddenly we had this huge influx of people who had read the article and wanted to check us out. And a couple of our core Sangha members, that's how they ended up landing with us. And then that's what kind of sustained the Sangha. But these days it is mostly online. We used Meetup for a while, and that was useful, and maybe felt a little bit too eventually sort of like we were just not like everyone is welcome, but it felt like it was maybe just pulling people who wanted to like drop in for 5 minutes and see what this thing is all about, versus someone who was actually like, oh, I'm looking for a community for Sangha who I can connect with and practice with. And we're really trying to create a space where Sangha is at the heart. And so people are like valuing this idea of community, co-creating community together. So we
Yeah.
just use the website.
Gotcha. Yeah. Yeah, it's kind of hard to focus or to build community if people are just coming in just to kind of kick the tires, so to speak, and just kind of have a look. And when it comes to welcoming people in, and they haven't meditated before, this is maybe even their first experience within Buddhism. Uh, how do you kind of set them up in the space? And like, what is a weekly meeting look like in general? Like how does it usually kind of flow? I'm just curious like how, how you kind of take care of those that are new, but also serve those that are trying to deepen themselves at the same time.
Most recently, what we've been doing for the past year-ish is once a month, our topic is more. So typically we have a half-hour meditation and then a half-hour talk/discussion. And our once a month, the talk is more of a beginner-friendly type topic. So it's something that anyone can still benefit from learning about some of like the core teachings of Buddhism, because we need to keep hearing about them again and again in different ways, but also brought in on a level that's really super practical and introductory for people who haven't been exposed to that. And we've also begun to offer a sort of welcome to Winding Path offering, which is just, we're open half an hour early for those the same night we do the beginner night on. So people, and sometimes people just come to that. They just want to see, who are you? And we welcome that. It's not like we don't want people to just drop in and see who we are. It's just that we prefer it if people who actually want to know who we are and aren't just sort of moving from virtual room to virtual room. That's all.
Yeah, yeah. And it's great that you have that kind of half-hour space for people to just kind of take a peek, see what's going on, and as opposed to everyone being in a focused mode and having that kind of like in and out sort of experience. And when it comes to, because on the website, which is great, if there's so many different resources and then links to the Tendai Buddhist Institute, there is uh, some reading, some like some books to kind of deepen your understanding of Buddhism in general, but also of Tendai. And when it comes to like the explanations of what Tendai is and what the mission of Winding Path Sangha is, there is this I don't know if eclectic's the right word, but there's this more open and inclusive approach to Buddhism. It seems like there are elements of Zen that you can kind of identify within Tendai, and there are maybe some I don't know, Vipassana elements. I don't know if that's accurate, but like maybe you can have some of those within the Tendai approach. Is there something that you find particularly helpful for your approach to doing Tendai Buddhism, or something that speaks to you as someone that practices Buddhism like the most, like that you find the most, uh, I don't know, the thing that deepens your practice the most?
Yeah, I think that um, that that ekayana idea that's at the heart of what you're naming, all these different uh, teachings and practices that are part of Tendai, um, is really what is one of the things that's most valuable about it, with the idea that any one of us is going to find use in a particular teaching or practice at a different point in our own journey. So for me, I think over time there have been, and talk to other people, there are times where you hear a particular teaching and you think, no, I don't think so. And then, it comes around again in a couple of years and you're like, now that is something to learn more about. And the same with different practices, they at different times, a different practice one practice might resonate more with another. I know people who came into this, specifically for meditation and then found some other practice much more powerful. I think for me, over the thing that first sort of grabbed me in was more of the devotional practices, rather than meditation. I mean, I sort of came to Buddhism looking for, I guess, meditation, thinking that's what it was. I didn't really know, but the thing that probably kept me sustaining practice and coming back are the devotional elements to it.
And is that like mostly expressed through like an offering, whether it's like incense or bowing, or is there something in particular that you like to express that kind of devotion to, or as? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it can be just different chanting practices. Um, what the practice looks like will change over time, but venerating different Buddhas and bodhisattvas and the qualities that they embody, and trying to take on those qualities myself as much as possible, I think is
That's where it is.
part of that
And
practice.
and is the temple space I mean, is there a lot of representation in statuary and other maybe art that has a representation for these different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas? I mean, do you have like a pretty wide range of figures and icons and things like that that sustain or kind of create a focal point and a devotion center towards, or is it more of a bare altar space, or maybe a combination of each?
It is it's not a bare altar space. Jizo Bodhisattva is our home zone, our main image. And we do have, so we don't have a lot of different statuary. We have the two mandala, the Taizokai and Kongokai mandala up, so representing all those Buddhas, and that esoteric piece of Tendai. But we haven't, like, unlike a temple in Japan where there are so many different images, we're not like that yet.
Gotcha. Yeah, yeah. But there is maybe an aspiration or an interest in maybe developing that kind of a larger kind of array, or is it? Do you kind of do you stylistically, aesthetically, do you find that on a spiritual level, this is home enough or sacred enough of a space with how it is now?
I think it's sacred enough of a space how it is now, and I think in some ways, it makes, I think the more different Buddhas and Bodhisattvas there are, the more foreign it feels to people who are coming in for the first time. And I think part of the journey of being a American Tendai priest who is, like, at the there are huge pieces of the tradition in Japan that we don't have yet, right? In the sense that there's so much getting passed down within that lineage, and we're at the beginning of this journey in the US, and I should speak for myself, not for we, but certainly, I feel like I have the smallest bit of Tendai here, right? In terms of the big picture. And so I think one thing we wrestle with here is, how do we make sure we're staying true to the roots of Tendai and translating that for people in front of us without it being like we're appropriating culture and aspects of it from Japan, but then what's that boundary between appropriation and just staying true to your lineage and knowing, no, actually this is part of Tendai, so we need to bring it here. And for me, some of the devotion and the chanting and yeah, we're gonna have an image on the altar. That's what we do. But do we need to have all of the images? Maybe not.
Right. Yeah, and I appreciate your care in towing that line, or kind of exploring it and letting, because it's a difficult topic. It's a difficult thing. I think that I don't know what the conversation is like among a lot of the white Buddhist convert communities, or that are founded by white Buddhist converts, or whatever it is, that are based in America, or how in general Buddhists are founding and organizing their temples in a way that is, if it has to nod to a lineage, and maybe it has to also nod to a culture as well, whether or not the people that are starting are affiliated with it. And there is this kind of thing where you want to honor everything, you want to keep it, offer that respect back to the lineage, but also too, you kind of want to make it approachable for that person that comes in that might feel like, well, there's clearly so much going on that I don't know about, and so I'm in over my head, so I can't. This isn't accessible to me. I can't come in here from this space, or and also too, just like what feels comfortable for the Sangha, or what feels comfortable for the Sangha leaders. I think that it is a very delicate thing to navigate, and so yeah, I definitely appreciate where you're coming from that. And then when it comes to, as someone that practices in a Tendai tradition, do you have an altar set up in a personal way? Do you, in your own home, or in your own room, or wherever it is special that is separate from the hondo, do you have a little space that you use in any way as part of practice?
Predominantly, we use the main hondo space. Just that's where just to get the energy in there. And I mean, I think I'll do my own walking practice not in there. So the outdoors is my space beyond what's in the main practice area.
Gotcha. Yeah, so there aren't kind of like little satellite spaces or other things that kind of make it, you kind of like want to imbue the Hondo with as much focus and energy as possible. Yeah, that's and also too, like recognizing too that outdoor element as well and bringing that in. No, that's all wonderful. And then what is it like to, because I know that you work with this North American uh larger umbrella organization, the Tendai Buddhist Institute. What are those conferences like? I mean, I don't know if you have conferences, but what are the meetings like? What are things that are maybe of concern or of importance right now, as far as like as we, in preparations for the next year or anything like that? Is there anything that's coming up, or like any initiatives that the Tendai Buddhist Institute is trying to become more involved with?
Yeah, I think so we're much smaller and less far along in our development than having conferences, I would, from my perspective. And it's interesting to me. I've, for a couple of years, I've networked with the Gen X Buddhist teachers community. And so it's been really excellent to meet so many leaders from other lineages, and to hear a lot of the folks from Zen talking about conferences and like really formal organizations and networks for support they have. I'm like, wow, that's amazing. And they're like 100 years further along in development in the US than we are. But I think what we really have worked on over the past several years at Tendai Buddhist Institute is trying to create opportunities for people going through the priest training or having gone through the priest training to regularly convene and support each other in our practice, in our Sangha development. And so for a while, we've tapered off a little bit recently, but we were meeting probably 3-ish times a year online because people are spread out in a lot of places, but really trying to dig into issues of Sangha leadership and support each other to really be able to represent our tradition effectively.
Yeah. And I'm glad that there's that kind of feeling of like, well, maybe one day, and all that, but like also recognizing where you are, and trying to figure out the best way to support each other as you as the institute and as Tendai develops in North America. And has it led to some travel for you? I mean, have you been to Canada out there to see what the sanghas are like out there? I mean, have you been to elsewhere in the United States as you kind of have been working with the institute?
No, because like periodically we have convened at the institute, which is within driving distance for me, so not far. So I haven't made it around to the other places
Yeah.
in our network. Yeah.
Well, I'm happy to hear that it's within driving distance, so that's great that you can kind of like, there's like a distance, but you can also connect to it and kind of convene and meet where it where everyone will be like centering, like congregating and coming into their own. And I was also wondering too about because I was looking online, there is a as part of the Sangha's experience or practice, there is like a reading component that's offered. There is like a study group component that's offered, and it seems like that might be something that the Winding Path Sangha is maybe sets for themselves. I don't know if the rest of the institute has recommendations for everyone else to read the same book at the same time, but there is you're reading right now Emptiness and Omnipresence: An Essential Introduction to Tiantai Buddhism by Rook A. Zipperin.
Mhm.
I hope I'm pronouncing that right. But how has the study group element of Winding Path Sangha been, and how has been reading things maybe for the first time or the second time or many times helped you with your own practice?
Yeah, I think the study group has been really useful um, for me. I mean, each time, coming back to a text like a couple years later, I'm like, oh, wait, now I understand this. Or sometimes I look at my notes and think like, oh, wow, I feel like I understood more then than I do at this moment. But I would also say that, so it's kind of interesting. Tendai Buddhist Institute actually offers, they're in the middle of a like weekly reading of, sorry, it's on the shelf behind me, Clear Serenity, Quiet Insight. So Paul Swanson's translation of the Makachi Kan. And that's like a 3-volume work. They've been studying that for a long time. And so that's the super duper study version. And I think some of the branch sanghas are offering the maybe slightly more introductory in ways into the teaching. So I've been collaborating with the leader at the Sangha in the Adirondacks, and we were working on, I use the word translation lightly because I'm not fluent in Japanese, but we took, one of our teachers had written a really useful intro guide to Tendai that we were sort of translating or reading as best we could with the assistance of my limited Japanese and translation software, and then are doing additional reading in different English texts to try to really think about what is it we want to say here. That just creating that text was a useful process for us. And I think anytime you're teaching with another teacher, you get it really strengthens what you can offer the Sangha members. So we had members from a few different Tendai Sanghas who were joining for that group, and that seemed really useful to them.
Yeah. And is that something to be published or to be shared via like PDF, or is that something that's still kind of in the works and you're still kind of getting that document ready?
We finished our first iteration of it, which we were using explicitly for the study group. We decided we could get it to good enough to share with a group that we were dialoguing with. And we said, maybe we'll come back to it and, take a round to attempt at making it into something that could be shared more broadly, but we haven't
Gotcha.
gotten there yet.
Oh, because I would love to one day when it's ready, I would love to see that, because it I mean, it would just be helpful and useful to have some good just slightly deeper than intro, like fully intro kind of material to kind of like get an understanding and have some more entryways within it to kind of engage. And it's great to know too that, if you want to look for a study group that has a more deepened or more I don't know, more familiar. If you're more familiar with Tendai, you can jump into the Tendai Buddhist Institute's study group. And I would imagine there's a virtual element to it. Can you join via Zoom?
They actually meet. Most ours is virtual, and they're all, most of the peer study ones are all virtual.
Oh, that's great. Oh, good. That's awesome. Yeah. And then so are you, I guess, as you were deepening your Tendai Buddhist practice, was reading a big component for you, or did you find that like were there any books in particular that got you to practice deeper, or was it more just kind of like the experience of practicing, being there, meeting teachers, and all of that?
Mostly practicing, being there, meeting teachers. There aren't a lot of entry-level Tendai specific texts that are written, and so the reading I've done on my own with Buddhism over the years has been from a whole array of teachers from different traditions, and who are writing in English. There is a ton in like, let me just clarify, right? There's a ton about Tendai in Japanese, but so that's a barrier I'm trying to overcome little by little, working on learning the language. Hopefully by the end of this lifetime, I'll be able to read some text about Tendai in Japanese. But I do think that there also is a monthly class at Tendai Buddhist Institute where we read a sutra. We read, so the process is reading together. We'll just, like, someone reads a paragraph, then we talk about that paragraph, move on to the next paragraph. So, we spend like a couple years per text usually, because it's a slow process getting at that once a month. But we're in the Vimalakirti Sutra right now. And so that is the study I've done, the reading I've done, sort of supported by Tendai Buddhist Institute, has been diving into a bunch of sutra together that way.
That's wonderful. Yeah, I feel like that barrier that you're trying to overcome is a very noble feat. I did an intro to Japanese course, and it's so difficult. You really have to spend so much time kind of like trying to understand it. But then I feel like once you have that key, you can open so many doors, you can open so many books, and you can really deepen things. But even then, there's like a lot of, sounds like, some resources that you've been pulling from a lot of different traditions. And I think that that close study, that close examination, like, what does that word mean, and how do I, hopefully that kind of unlocks some things, or helps you kind of like deepen some things when it comes to translating and engaging with sutras. I had two more questions. One is about the temple cats. So how has that been to have, is it Kage and what was the other one? Freckles, right?
Freckles.
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. How do they what is their practice like, and how is it like practicing with the temple cats?
Well, when people are, anytime we have just a, like, evening service or something that's only that's not a full retreat, they're closed up upstairs. So people may have cat allergies. We also don't want them running outside. We're not, there's like it's relatively busy streets around here. So, but Kage at times will meow. We hear her overhead, just letting us know she's there. And many of our Sangha members enjoy cats. So if it's like a potluck day on a Saturday, we'll often let them out at the very end so everyone can get their fill of the cats. And sometimes when no one's around, we actually will find Freckles. There was a period last summer where, she changes her sleeping spots periodically, and for about 2 or 3 weeks, we found her sitting on the leader's cushion, like in the spot where the leader sits in the hondo, just like curled up right there sleeping. We're like, okay, she's, don't know what she's trying to tell us, but something.
Yeah, yeah. At the very least, this is a comfortable seat. So that's
Yes,
uh
exactly.
that's well, that's great. I feel like there are wonderful pictures on the website about them, or of them. So I was happy to see them there. And yeah, it's good to be sensitive to people that in order to allow the most people in, you have to be accommodating to allergies, and making sure that everyone's safe and healthy. And yet it's great to know that the cats, when it's their time to be free, that they uh don't mind being in the Hondo, and and if anything, they'll kind of check in just to see how everything's going, which is great.
Yeah, for
Uh,
sure.
and then my last question is more open, and that is, if there's anything, like a cause or a foundation, anything that you'd want to promote, that to kind of get more word about something, and also to, if there is any advice you'd want to give to somebody at any point along their Buddhist path. So just anything that you would have maybe wanted to have heard at a certain time in your life, or if there's just something generally about walking the path that you would want to share.
Hmm. I think that sort of advice for traveling the path. One thing I've been thinking about a lot right now or lately is the power of Sangha, and I think the role of Sangha in supporting practice. And so anyone who's trying to start out practicing or studying Buddhism sort of on your own, I would recommend, connect with a Sangha, and you may have to pop into a few of them to see if this feels like the place for you. But it is one of the three jewels, and it's an important piece of the practice. So we have a very well-developed sense of individualism, at least in the US, we tend to. And so that we like to think we can do it on our own, but I think you actually miss a key component of the teachings without being in that community of practice. So that would be my advice at this moment.
That's
and
great.
then related to, I guess, causes, I won't recommend any particular one cause, but within Tendai, there's this idea of light up your corner. And I can't remember at this moment the Japanese for it, but essentially this idea that wherever you are, whatever your sphere of influence, your realm of influence is, do something, like sort of act as a bodhisattva in that sphere of influence. Do something to make that small corner of the world better for those around you. And so I think it's important for everyone to find that way to light up their own corner, and not to see practice as just something that stays on the cushion.
Yeah. I love that phrasing, light up your corner. And that being something that, it's your corner, and you have the capacity to light it up, and there's an invitation to act in that. And it also, it's an invitation that is empowering to you, because where you have it's where you have your influence. And yeah, I really like that phrasing a lot. And yeah, that's wonderful. And then yeah, too, I hear a lot about the importance of Sangha, and what it means to be sitting and sustaining and being sustained in your practice by others around you, and the importance of that. So I think this is all wonderful things to hear. Well, Reverend Shingaku, thank you so much for speaking with me today. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to me. These are all wonderful things. I'm very excited about you having this more permanent space now, but also to just being at the beginnings of Tendai, as it kind of like develops and uh, lands more firmly, and kind of roots itself in the United States and North America. It's really exciting, and I'm just really excited that you are so active and a part of spreading this. And I really appreciate you discussing your practice and Tendai with me. It's been really wonderful.
Great. Thank you so much. This was fun to get a chance to chat.
Yes, absolutely, absolutely. And I wish the best to the Temple Cats, and hope to check in soon.